Nostalgia. I remember a simpler time in 2012. Photos of an alicorn Twilight appeared on Brand Licensing Europe's Twitter page, and suddenly bronies and Pegasisters alike were on guard. Then came Magical Mystery Cure in 2013, and the fans did rage. For 9 months, every time the fandom's temper seemed to cool, a new bit of Equestria Girls or other merchandise would pop up, flare the anger, and start the process anew. But along with this anger came creative expression. Sometimes it was artwork in favor of the change, sometimes against it. Yet with each new bit of creative expression, fans seemed to integrate this change into the larger awareness. My very first video was not an episode review, but a piece on how Twilight's new station could work for her or undermine her. Because I was frustrated that no one was laying out such thoughts, and vitriol seemed to be the driving force. And now, in this year of 2021, we're right back at it. It officially began with a consumer products release on kidscreen.com, featuring the first sales pitch for the upcoming September movie and the series to follow. So let's get back to basics and talk about this here pitch. To quote Emily Thompson, VP of Global Brand Management, the final season of Friendship is Magic brought that storytelling to a satisfying conclusion. Oh, I'm afraid you're in for a rude experience when dealing with fandoms. And it felt like the right time to close that chapter of pony history. Now that I will agree with. I can't speak for every fan, but by and large, I was pleased to enjoy such a conclusion. After all, my own childhood entertainment features a slew of unresolved conflicts, unfinished quests, and usually abruptive ends. Except this wasn't an end, as we'll be returning to Equestria. With the movie, we started development and made the decision to expand the world of My Little Pony, rather than starting from scratch with total brand reinvention. We found ourselves with this whole decade of storytelling, and really rich lore, and it felt wrong to walk away from all that. So instead they're going to jump ahead in Equestria's timeline, and focus on areas not previously explored. Dare I hope we'll get to see that giant mushroom forest? Generation Alpha, who? Ew. Okay, proceed. Generation Alpha has a higher emotional intelligence, and they expect a lot more from their entertainment. How dare! As a Gen Xer / geriatric millennial, I resent this implication that we suffered a low emotional intelligence, or demanded less from our entertainment, though I can see why people would think so. If you've seen my video on Inhumanoids, then you'll likely have an idea of where I'm going. I remember the cartoons of the 80s and 90s with great fondness, but looking back as an adult, I realized that there were a lot of negative elements we unconsciously absorbed. Just as an example, let's consider the story of Casey Kasem. Most knew him as the beloved voice of America's Top 20. I celebrated him as the voice of Cliffjumper, Blue Streak, and Teletran 1.
I want to boot some Decepticon right in his turbocharger.
He was a part of the Transformers through the movie and second season, until the show decided to introduce a Middle Eastern country called Carbamia. Yeah, don't expect to see a callback to that anytime this century. Kasem explained his decision to leave the show in a 1990 publication called The Link. One week, the script featured an evil character named Abdul, king of Carbamia. He was like all the other cartoon Arabs. I asked the director, are there any good Arabs in the script for balance? We looked. There was one other, but he was not different from Abdul. So I told the show's director that, in good conscience, I couldn't be a part of that show. One of the hardest hitting things he wrote there was that this stereotype villain was like all the other cartoon Arabs. Bad enough that this was accepted humor, but it was also abundant humor not limited to one stereotype. I loved the original Ninja Turtles cartoon, but this was in the first episode.
What say you, all-wise sensei? I say, throw the bomb out!
I bring this up because ideas have a stunning longevity, especially if we absorb them unconsciously. I think this depiction can be traced back to 1944 and a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Bugs featured in a propaganda piece mocking the Japanese and the conflict in World War II. It featured incredibly racist depictions, stoking a sense of American superiority. Problem is that this mentality didn't end with the war. Even the cartoon itself saw syndication, and in doing so, it presented the idea that stereotyping other races was okay. Warner Brothers has since added disclaimers that acknowledge this history without condoning it. Yet I worry that this message claims that, now that we've denounced this past, it's assumed that the negative message is gone. The fact that this line of thinking carried forward over 4 decades into a completely different franchise shows how these ideas can keep appearing and influencing us. Which leads us back to the Generation 5 article and its statement. We know it's important to Gen Alpha that they see their peer groups represented in their entertainment, and that shaped how we built our core cast. Many fans have decried this as a politically motivated move, and to be fair, this may indeed have been a studio mandate.
Gender balanced, pronoun neutral, and ethnically diverse.
Even if we assume this to be true, what makes it a bad idea? I don't see this as a political move. I see it as a cultural shift, an effort to become conscious of how we present other people in entertainment and counteract negative messages, which is a long overdue effort. Yet I cannot ignore that even a noble goal can fall short. This statement talks about representation. How are they going to achieve such a thing in a story about pastel-colored equines? We've actually been down this road before. Way back in the early days of 2010. A writer for Miss Magazine, Kathleen Richter, immediately denounced friendship as magic. I showed the video to fellow Miss intern/blogger Kyle and asked, "What's wrong with this picture?" He responded, "There aren't any black ponies."
Come get your brothers up on the wall.
I had originally assumed that the purple ponies were supposed to represent black ponies. Why? But he was right. The ponies don't seem very racially diverse. She then went on to decry that the 2 guard ponies seen in the original opening are supposed to represent servitude to a white leader. Big problem I have with Richter and Kyle's interpretation is that their ideal of diversity seems limited to skin color. And I wonder if they would have later praised the show for featuring ponies like Mistmane, Saffron Marsala, and Coriander Kumar. But here's the thing, I like these characters, but I wouldn't call it representation. Again, my childhood's entertainment would show people dressed in different clothing and speaking with a thick accent, but I wouldn't call that a win for representation. So the statement about shaping the core cast around representation really confuses me, because I don't think we've done enough to establish what representation really means. I watched Miraculous Ladybug in New York, a movie that features a quartet of new characters. 2 young women, one of native lineage and a robot disguised as a black teenager. Their parents are a same-sex couple, and one of them hides her gender identity for confusing reasons. The group's entire conflict revolves around their lives as superheroes. The kids want to act as independents, their parents want to keep them close. A relatable conflict, but only defined within the scope of their alter egos. Their physical depictions check a set of criteria, but because they're such a limited part of the show, I can't call it representation. It's just surface level. Especially if you're trying to pass off a robot impersonating a black woman as if it should connect to a specific audience. So if surface level appearance doesn't equate to genuine representation, what does? To answer that, I want to look at the vocal talent and fans for the year 2000 Static Shock. For a lot of kids, Virgil Hawkins was their very first black superhero.
I never knew how important it would be to meet a role model like you. A black superhero. I don't know, it validates me somehow.
And Virgil's voice actor, Phil Lamar, summarized why this character works so well. It wasn't about that Static was black, but he was black. His life, his world, those were real. And that kind of normalization is what's key to true diversity. We did get to see equal parts of Virgil's life, both as a hero and as a teenage kid. And Static was able to tackle topics like homelessness, dyslexia, even a school shooting, because we could experience the impacts alongside this young character.
Sometimes I wish there was a black superhero back home for folks to look up to.
Oh, but there is, and he is my hero too.
Borrowing now from a blogger by the name of Keshiv Kant, who wrote What Static Shock Meant to Me as a Young Black Boy. Virgil showed me that it was okay to be human. When it comes to representation, it is important to show characters who have flaws and insecurities. No person has the ability to always be strong or always be confident in their choices. Marginalized groups often do not allow themselves to feel this way as they focus on fighting their oppressors.
I'm just so confused. I'm mad at Jimmy for shooting my friend. I'm mad at Nick for messing with Jimmy. I'm mad at myself for not telling somebody when I first heard about the gun. I'm mad at everyone.
However, it is important to remember that marginalized groups have the right to be a human being. Characters that are supposed to represent marginalized groups should let them know this.
It's okay to feel angry, Virgil. It's what we do with that anger that's important.
I think that's the biggest issue with this Generation 5 announcement. We got hints at the cast marketing appeal through diversity and inclusion, but we've barely heard one thing about their characters. And character, especially if one is looking to truly represent a specific group, is critical. This becomes a deeper issue as the Consumer Report states, "The movie's main character, for example, is an activist working to make the pony world a better place." Plenty of fans immediately label the lead heroine as a social justice warrior. But that is a term that has lost all meaning due to its use as a casual insult. One legitimate concern fans have expressed is, if this does indeed take place in Equestria's future, does this mean that Twilight Sparkle's efforts failed? I've seen several fans draw a comparison to the fall of Luke Skywalker just to set the stage for Rey. And while we would get more detail later on, this press release didn't offer much. So I looked at our own history and all the leaders, activists, and revolutionaries who worked to change the world. I wouldn't call any of them a failure due to the fact that those conflicts continue. It really comes down to a movie quote.
We never lose our demons, Mordo. We only learn to live above them.
I think one of the biggest mistakes in talking about history is the assumption that progress has always been linear. No mistakes or setbacks. We look at history and try to see a figure who completely wiped out inequality, ignorance, or hatred. And to be blunt, that's a greater fantasy than magical talking horses. By that same notion, I don't have an issue with the idea that Equestria suffered a reversion. Instead, I wonder how much time it took for this to happen. After all, 1,000 years absence from Twilight's time will feel different than if it only took a few years. But the greater question on my mind goes back to characterization. What kind of activist will this pony be? Will she be an activist committed to a single cause with multiple avenues? Or will she take up a new cause every week? I had my fill of that with the Power Rangers.
These are your cause heads. They find a world-threatening issue and stick with it for about a week.
And how will this pony approach such problems? Will she know the right goal but question what's the right path? Or will she be presented as unfailingly right and everyone else needs to get with the program? There's a statement from English actor, comedian, writer, and philosopher Stephen Fry that I think applies to this big unknown.
I believe one of the greatest human failings is to prefer to be right than to be effective.
I hope this new character will seek an effective path and maybe learn something new along the way, but right now it's too soon to tell. This Consumer Report is loaded with buzzwords that make a decent sales pitch to parents, but offers next to nothing by way of genuine substance. We know that there's a plan for how these characters are constructed, but not how they will be expressed. We know the lead character's job, but not her outlook. We know that this will be set in familiar territory, but its presentation could be completely disassociated from what we've seen before. Or, and this is important to remember, this report might be complete hot air. When Twilight got a pair of wings, the press release talked about the ideals of being a princess. But how often did the show address what those ideals meant? Thinking about this idea offers me a chance to consider what media I want to celebrate, but it doesn't make me want to give up on a series that hasn't started yet. The next big news would be the very unexpected revelation of the lead cast, followed by more official releases. Let's talk about that next time. I'm Silver-Quill. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all my Patreon supporters, whose help keeps these videos self-sustaining. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting After the Fact through Patreon or Ko-fi. Links are in the description.